Bhadram karnebhi shrunuyama devaha Bhadram pashyema akshabhirya jatraha Sthirairangehi sushtuvam sustanubhihi Vyasena devahidam yadayuhu Sustina indro vruddhasavaha Sustina pusha vishwavedaha Sustina stakshu arishtanemihi Sustino brihaspadir dadhatu Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O Almighty Lords, let's be capable of performing sacrifices and hear auspicious sounds with our ears and see auspicious forms with our eyes, with strong limbs and body and remaining prayerful ever. Let us spend our God-given life directing our mind to only auspicious things. Om, peace, peace, peace. Now we are right now dealing with the third section, third chapter of the Mandukya Karika. I already explained at the very beginning that the central theme of, or rather the unique contribution of Gaudapada to Vedanta philosophy is the doctrine of non-origination, as it is called, or Ajativada. The absolute reality is one, non-dual, impersonal, attributeless, immanent, transcendent, Brahman or Atman. This world as a separate entity has not come out of it. Now this is a very, very special doctrine. Its uniqueness as a doctrine of creation can be better appreciated when we compare it with other doctrines of origination of the universe in monotheistic religions and also other systems of Indian thought. This is technically called Utpattivada. Utpatti in Sanskrit means origination, coming into existence. Now, this term has got certain implications. When you use the word origination, you imply that something comes into existence. From a state of non-existence, it comes into a state of existence. That's what we imply by the word origination. We call Utpatti in Sanskrit. Now, to understand this, to go deeper into this subject, we must know what is the source of this origination, from where it originates. Generally speaking, in monotheistic religions, in the three Abrahamic religions, and also in the popular Hindu theistic religious traditions, God creates this world. That's the idea behind. So, God is one entity and this created world is another entity, which implies plurality or duality. Gaudapada's philosophy is a prelude to Adi Shankaracharya's non-dualistic philosophical system. He was the first one who systematically analyzed the various implications of Advaita philosophy. And when after about 150 years, Shankaracharya started writing his well-known commentaries and preaching non-dualistic system, he incorporated many of these ideas into his system. So as I said earlier, when you talk about the world, when you talk about origination of the world or the creation of the world, first with regard to the world, you have to admit that world comes into existence. Second, it should have a creator. It's called, efficient cause. And it should have something out of which God creates His world. It's a material cause. So efficient cause and material cause. And there are secondary causes that I'm not going to deal with this. See, well, to make you understand this, let us take a pot made of clay. The pot is the effect. The pot maker is the efficient cause. In Sanskrit, it's called nimitta karanam, the old usage. And the clay out of which he produces this pot is material cause. For a goldsmith, the golden ring is the effect. The goldsmith is the efficient cause, nimitta karanam, and gold itself is material cause. Now, for a pot maker, he may have to make use of many other things. Perhaps he may have to use some instrument, All these illustrations and analogies were used in books, in old philosophical books, right from 2nd century AD onwards. So that's why these old examples and illustrations are still being used. From 2nd century AD onwards, these analogies of a pot maker making a pot out of clay, or a rope being mistaken as a snake, all these analogies had already been used by that time. Now, secondary causes are there, which are not directly related to the pot. See, the pot maker may have to use some animals to bring clay from a distant place. They could be different, You can use a bullock he can use. He can use a donkey, or he can use perhaps a horse to bring clay from a distant place. And perhaps instead of using one particular instrument for making a pot, he can use some other type of instrument. But he has to use clay. So the relationship between clay and the pot is inseparable. It's called samavai karana, means inseparable relationship. The relationship between gold and golden ring is inseparable. But the relationship between golden ring and machine that is used to manufacture this golden ring is not inseparable. There could be different types of machines. One particular machine is not necessarily inseparably related to golden ring. But gold is inseparably related to golden ring. Just a clay's relationship with pot made of clay cannot be separated. Now, but in all these cases, normally we think a pot comes into existence. Why? Because a pot can be used for bringing water, but clay cannot be used. So on the basis of practical utility, it's called the Vyavahara Buddhi in Sanskrit, the technical books, means the way we normally make use of a pot in normal life. We use a pot for bringing water from a distant place. That usefulness of pot cannot be related to clay, because clay cannot be used to bring water. Only pot can be used. But this utility value is not permanent. So people who believe that a pot really comes into existence from clay, a pot has got an independent status as a reality, independent of the status of clay, argue that Pot can be used for bringing water. Clay cannot be used for that. Therefore, pot is different from clay. And pot has got a shape, a form, and therefore a name to distinguish that from clay. Therefore, name, form, utility. In Sanskrit, called nama, rupa, vivahara. These three terms, all these terms are very often used in the original text. I'm using these terms. Some of you may, when you read this text in the original, sometimes you come across this. So, practical utility, name and form. These things distinguish a pot from clay. So, dualists like Madhvacharya or all philosophical schools belong to pluralistic system, argue that pot has got a status independent of the status of clay. Advaitins say no. Their argument is, pot is the same as clay. Pot existed before clay was manufactured. And when you break the pot, then also you get clay. And when the pot is sitting in front of you, then also it is not different from clay. So, before the pot was created, it was clay. When it is sitting in front of you as a pot, then also it is clay. Only it has got a name, form and special utility. When it is broken, then also it is clay. Then where is clay? Where is pot? Pot has not come into existence. That is the argument of Gaudapada. That is the argument. That is the implication of this unique doctrine of Gaudapada, which is known as the doctrine of non-origination. Swami Vivekananda refers to this idea, not directly but indirectly. See, Swami Vivekananda says, when you look at God, Atman, without any association with name and form, it is Atman. When you look at Atman in association with name and form, or in another context, as Swamiji said, through the prism of name, form and causality, then it is world. So when you look at Atman through the prism of name, form and causality, it is world. When you look at the world without any relationship with name and form, then it is Atman. In Sanskrit it is called Surupa Drishtya Brahma Eva Nama Rupa Drishtya Jagat, which means this Atman, this Brahman, this reality, when you look at it through the prism of name and form, then it is world. When you look at it without name and form, without using the prism of name and form, then it is Atman only. In another context, Swamiji says, if you look at man without any association with name and form, he's God only. So man is God, God taken name and form and all other allied limitations and associations. So you can say, now you can say that the pot has not really come into existence. In the sense, the pot doesn't have an independent status. An independent entity, independent of clay, has not come into existence. When the pot is sitting in front of you, then also it is clay. When you break it, then also it is clay. Before the pot maker made the pot, then also it is clay. Then where is pot? Pot is only in our mind, name and form. When the pot maker does some work with the help of some instruments, the clay takes a different shape, different form, and then you have to give it a different name. You cannot call it clay, so you give it name pot, that's all. Similarly, the world really has not come into existence. That's why for all great spiritual personalities, when they are in the state of the highest spiritual experience of Jiva Brahma Aikya, means the unity of individual soul and the universal soul, they don't see the world. They may be sitting in a market, but they can feel the presence of Atman everywhere. That's the idea behind. So, even in this world, when we live, we can look at this world as Atman consciousness itself. So that's why I said the fundamental doctrine of Gaudapada, his unique contribution is the doctrine of non-origination, is Sanskrit called Ajadivada. It can be explained negatively and also positively. In negative language, it means that the world, being only an appearance, is in fact never created. What you call the world is Brahman itself. Then why do you see this plurality and duality? Name and form are there. Well, look at the ocean. When you look at the ocean, you will see mighty waves, forms, and different formations of the water body. So we call them waves, tides, and so on. But these waves do not have an independent status. It cannot exist independent of water. Even a 300 feet tsunami wave is only water. It is not different from the water which is calm and quiet. But, of course, at the practical level, there is a difference, relative level. 300 feet tsunami wave can kill people, can destroy property and human lives. That's true. But from a philosophical angle, this wave is the same as water. So waves belong to water. Water doesn't belong to wave. Water can exist independent of wave, because all the oceans are not turbulent all the time. Some of them are calm and quiet. So the waves belong to water. The water doesn't belong to wave. Without water, waves cannot exist, because waves are nothing but water, certain formations of water. But water can exist without wave. Similarly, for an enlightened person, the world itself is Brahman or Atman. That's implication, Sarvam Khalu Idam Brahma. This is one approach. So, according to Gaudapada, according to the doctrine of non-origination, the world is only an appearance, therefore it is never created. You ask a goldsmith, for example. A goldsmith may perhaps look at the golden ring only as gold, just as one can look at the ocean, even if it is very turbulent, full of waves and high tide, still we can look at the ocean only as water. So in negative terms, it means the world is in fact never created. That is the implication of the theory of doctrine of non-origination. Positively, it means the Atman or Brahman is never created, and therefore it never becomes the cause of anything that comes out of it. So Brahman is not the cause of the universe. That's the point. Why? Because Brahman remains the same. If Brahman becomes an effect and it remains a cause, then it undergoes change. So Brahman associated with name and form is the world. World without any association with name and form is Brahman itself. So two types of entities you find here which are non-originated. The world never comes into existence, just as the pot never comes into existence. Again, the Brahman, Atman also never comes into existence because it always exists. Existence always implies the transition of an entity from a state of non-existence into a state of existence. Brahman is ever existent, everlasting, eternal. Therefore, it always exists, and therefore it never comes into existence. That's the idea behind here. Now, Gaudapada, I'm giving an outline of the doctrine of non-origination. It's called Advaita Vedanta. It is, as I said, in the original contribution of Gaudapada. We have to remember many of these ideas could be found even in the Veda mantras, the Samhita mantra, ancient Vedic literature itself. But it was Gaudapada who systematically analyzed all these ideas into a compact philosophical structure. But Gaudapada agrees with Shunyavadins. Shunyavadin, as I said earlier, that this origination from an absolute point of view is an impossibility. Origination of the universe is impossible. Because origination means the world becomes an effect, Brahman is the cause. Which means the cause becomes the effect. Effect having an independent status. This is not acceptable to Vedantins. But you have to remember, in many ancient Indian philosophical systems, they argue and they accept that the world comes into existence. It's called different schools of Utpattivada, different schools of creation. As I said earlier, the popular theistic systems of philosophy in popular mythological Hinduism comes very close to the views of the three Abrahamic religions with regard to Genesis, with regard to the theory of creation of the universe. But Gaudapada or Advaitins do not accept this. So here, as I made the statement, Gaudapada here agrees with the Shunyavadins. Shunyavada, I think already explained, but I shall once more repeat. Shunyavada is a school of idealism. Its original exponent was Nagarjuna, who lived perhaps in the 4th or 5th century AD, almost 350 years before Shankaracharya. His most popular book, what's called the Bible of Shunyavada, the Bible of the theory of emptiness, is called Madhyamika Karika, or sometimes called the Moola Madhyama Shastram, it is called. The original book is called, they are known by 2-3 different names. It's called Madhyamika Karika. Shunyavada is one of the 2 idealistic schools of later Buddhism. Buddhism, or what you call later Buddhism, developed 4 distinct schools of thought. 2 schools of idealism and 2 schools of realism. Realism in Buddhistic philosophical tradition implies the belief in the reality of external objects. External objects are real. That's the theory of realists. These 2 schools of realists are Sautrantika and Vaibhashika. These 2 schools of realism are related to, they are allied to the Hinayana Buddhism, sometimes called, the Theravada Buddhism, which is popular in Thailand, Sri Lanka, Burma, and many of these countries. Both these schools, realistic schools, accept the external objects are real. Only one minor difference is this. One school, Sautrantikas, one school of philosophy says that external objects cannot be really perceived, can only be inferred. And the other school, Vaibhashikas, believe that external objects can be perceived. The reason why the earlier school of realists argue that external things cannot be perceived but can only be inferred is this. So Buddhists believe in what is called the theory or the doctrine of momentariness. That's how it is translated into English, but its original form is Kshana Bhangavada, meaning the school of the doctrine of momentariness. So when you see something with your eyes, your mind and eyes come together, then you perceive something. And when you say this is a table, the table that you are referring to at the time of speaking, making the statement, is not the same table which you saw, because one moment has passed. So everything changes in every moment. Kshana actually is a very, very small unit of time. That is the essence. That is common in Buddhist philosophy. So they say that things cannot be perceived and only inferred. The other school, the rival school of realism argues that no, it can be perceived, because inference is not possible without direct perception. Inference is closely related to direct perception. These are the 6 fundamental tools of knowledge in the in the philosophical epistemology, means theory of knowledge called. So, these are the 2 schools of realism. Now we are coming to Shunyavada. Now, the other 2 schools are 2 schools of idealism. As I said earlier, the Shunyavada, or the doctrine of emptiness, doctrine of voidness, expounded by Nagarjuna in his Madhyamika Karika, sometimes called Mula Madhyamika Karika or Mula Madhyama Shastram. There are 2-3 names by which it is known. And the other school of Buddhistic idealism is Vijnanavada, called Buddhistic subjective idealism. In fact, it is a forerunner to Berkeley's subjective idealism, which came, 2000 years later. We have to wait for almost 2000 years before Western thought caught up with Buddhistic subjective idealism, but the appearance of reality of Berkeley. Now, these subjective idealists believe that external things are completely non-existent. External objects have no reality, no independent status. They all exist so long as their images, impressions remain in our mind. Otherwise, they have no existence at all. This is the view of subjective idealists of Buddhism. Asanga, in his famous Yogacara Bhumi, Dignaga, and famous a number of Maitreyanatha, there are earlier Buddhistic thinkers. And many of them later went to China and spread the Shunyavada, the doctrine of emptiness, and also Vijnanavada in the Mahayana countries like China, Tibet, Japan, and many other countries. Now what I am trying to drive home is, there are some common points of agreement between Nagarjuna and Gaudapada. Therefore, sometimes you find many books written by modern scholars who would tell you, who argue that Gaudapada himself was a Buddhist. He was himself a follower of Nagarjuna. Some arguments are put forward. But we have to remember, Gaudapada was essentially a Vedantin. Nagarjuna taught that everything in this world is void. And voidness or emptiness becomes an absolute permanent category according to Nagarjuna. So he writes in his Madhyamika Karika, see, according to him, he says There are two realities, what is called the higher transcendental absolute reality, which is shunya, which is called emptiness, and the relative reality. The absolute category, the absolute philosophical category is emptiness. So himself says, Buddha taught two theories, dvesate bodhitevye. Neither, that's a point here. So he says, one is the relative, the other is the absolute. And the absolute experience is voidness itself. But Gaudapada says that there is an eternal subject, an experiencer, a witness, a seer, who realizes the identity of individual soul and universal soul, who realizes the ultimate non-dualistic experience. And when he realizes this ultimate non-dualistic experience, he experiences a unique sense of blessedness. He realizes that he himself is, or she himself is, that eternal, immanent, omnipresent, absolute reality. This experience leads to his moksha, as they use, a liberation in Vedanta. And the term used in Buddhistic tradition is nirvana. So Gaudapada says, when you realize this identity with the universal consciousness, you don't get merged into voidness or emptiness. Rather, you get that inexplicable joy or happiness or blessedness, which automatically follows your realization that you are one with the universal soul. So it is a state of positive bliss according to Vedanta. In Vedanta, they say this experience is an experience of positive blissfulness, a joy. You become one with, you experience your unity with the entire universal consciousness, universal reality. And this is liberation. But according to Shunyavada, the question arises, who experiences this sense of bliss? Who is the experiencer of the experience of nirvana? For that, there is no satisfactory answer from that you can find in the ancient Buddhist scriptures. So these are some of the fundamental ideas of the doctrine of non-origination. You have to remember, this is what Gaudapada is trying to drive home in the third prakarana. That is the central theme of the whole book. But this idea is put forward and expounded in the third prakarana, which we have just entered, and now we will continue the text. So we will come to the third section. It is called Advaita Prakaranam. But we can come to the sixth verse. The sixth verse is this. Rupa karya samakhyascha vidyante tatra tatra vai akasasya na bhedosti tadvad jiveshu nirnayaka. Again, Gaudapada is asking us to think of the analogy, the illustration that he referred to earlier. You have to think of this, a pot which is empty, and there is space within the pot, space limited apparently limited within the pot, confined to the pot. There is space outside the pot also. Sometimes we believe that the space within the pot is limited. because it is within a narrow space. It has got a rupa. Rupa means a form. The terms are used here. Karya. Karya means some utility. Samakhya means name. I shall just give the prose order of the verse, then come to the subject. So the verse is this: Rupa Karya Samakhyascha Bhidyande Tatra Tatra Vai Akasasya Na Bhedosti Tadva Jiveshu Nirnayeha. So the prose order is this: Rupa Karya Samakhyaha Tatra Tatra Bhidyande Vai Akasasya Bhedaha Na Asti Tadva Jiveshu Nirnayaha. The simple meaning is this. Gaudapada tries to drive home his central idea. What is central idea? The individual soul, the individual self, and the universal self are the same. Jivatma and Paramatma Aikya, the unity of individual self, soul, and the universal soul. It is the same. And the analogy, the illustration is this: just as the space which apparently is confined to the pot and the space outside the pot are the same. But then there are some differences that you notice with regard to the pot. It has got a form, and it has a different name. So in Sanskrit you find Ghata Akasha. Akasha means space. Ghata means Ghadavasthita Akasha. I mean space which is apparently confined to the pot. Ghata Akasha. Ghata Akasha means, Ghata means pot in Sanskrit. Akasha means space. Ghata Akasha means a space which is limited or confined within the pot. People will think the space within the pot is different from the space outside, the all-pervading space. Similarly, many people think the individual jivas are different and the universal self is different. Individual self is different from universal self. In fact, that is the view of all non-dualistic systems of philosophy, non-Advaitic systems of philosophy. They all argue that there is a difference between different individual selves, and also there is a difference between the individual self and the universal self. And there is a difference between the universe and there is a difference between different entities within the universe. So all these differences are posited by non-Advaitic schools of thinkers. Gaudapada tries to demolish their views. So he says, this name of the pot and the shape, they are not permanent. They come into existence. And whatever is impermanent cannot be called absolute reality. As I said earlier, anything to be called absolute reality in Vedantic tradition should satisfy certain conditions. First, it should remain the same without any change in the past, in the present, and in the future. Pot doesn't remain like that. It should be capable of being experienced as the same in the three stages of human experience, like the waking state, dream state, and deep sleep state. And then it should be free from all possible changes. All these entities are subject to change. So the universal self, when it reflects on individual mind or intellect, appears as individual self. In reality, it has no separate existence, independent of the universal self. There are a number of arguments put forward by other rival schools. For example, Sankhya philosophy is a famous, it is as a philosophical system, it is much more ancient than even Vedanta system. It was already popular in around 12th century BC itself, has produced outstanding Sankhya philosophers, even earlier. So, according to Sankhya philosophy, they believe in two fundamental entities, Purusha and Prakriti. I am not going into those details. The entire universe is an evolute of one of the two fundamental categories, namely Pradhanam or Prakriti. Now, these Sankhya philosophers question the argument of Gaudapada. Their argument is this. You are talking about Ghatakasha, means a pot. Suppose we have got 100 pots here. Some pots are filled with dust. Other pots are not. So there is a difference. All the pots are not the same. Similarly, all the individual selves, individual jivas, do not have the same experience of happiness, unhappiness, etc. See, this world has got 7 billion individual selves, individual souls. They have got 7 billion different types of experiences. Many are happy, many are unhappy, most of them have both experiences. There is a lot of dissimilarity, lot of plurality and diversity with regard to experience of all the different human beings in this world. And you say that all these jivas, all these individual selves have got the same Atman. If your argument is right, then all people should have the same degree of happiness or unhappiness. You don't find it. One person is happy and his neighbor is unhappy. You are happy, your brother is unhappy. Or vice versa. You are unhappy, the other one is unhappy. So there is so much of diversity and you are two individual selves. Similarly, the world has got 7 billion individual selves. Many of them are happy, many of them are unhappy, and there is so much of diversity, so much of duality, so many differences with regard to the experience of happiness, unhappiness, etc. Just as all these pots have their own peculiarities. If suppose you have 100 pots here in your room, some of them are dusty, some of them are clean, some have a different color, and so on. So much of diversity. But if you say all these individual souls are reflections of the same universal self, universal consciousness, then how do you explain this diversity? The Sankhyas will ask this question. Not only Sankhya's, another school Vaiseshikas, another Naiyayikas, different other schools of philosophers. They try to argue with Advaitin. They try to argue that the diversity is real. Nagarjuna says diversity is unreal, unity or oneness is real. They say diversity is real because there is so much of disharmony, diversity of human experiences. Here Gaudapada says, well, now each individual soul, so long as it has not experienced its unity with the universal self, has to undergo this cycle of birth, life and rebirth. And each soul, not actually soul, each subtle body, it's called Sukshma Sharira, mind, intellect complex, inner organs, Antakarana is called psychophysical mechanism. It absorbs and accumulates diversity of impressions, tendencies, depending upon their actions. And depending upon these accumulated tendencies and impressions, the mind and intellect also become clouded, may become clean or clouded, or there will be so many differences with regard to the cleanliness or the purity of the mind and intellect. Just as the same sun reflecting on 7 billion mirrors will have 7 billion different types of reflections. Sun is not responsible. Sun is the same sun blazing over our heads. But the mirrors are different. Some mirrors are small, some mirrors are big, some are dirty. So sun cannot reflect. There will be no light if the mirror is dirty, if it is cloudy. So depending upon the cleanliness or its absence of independent mirrors, the reflection of the sun will vary in its effulgence, in its ability to transmit light. Similarly, our mind and intellect have accumulated innumerable tendencies and impressions over hundreds of births in the past. If our mind and intellect have acquired a very high level of purity, then the sun of Atman will reflect with a very high degree of effulgence and purity. I have to quote again what Swami Vivekananda said in this context. He said, the difference between an amoeba and a Buddha is one of degrees, not of kind. Buddha in Sanskrit means the enlightened one. So any highly spiritually evolved person. Buddha is a classic example. The great Gautama Buddha himself is a classic example of a highly enlightened spiritual personality. So Vivekananda says the difference between a Buddha and an amoeba is one of degrees, which means in amoeba, this sunlight of spiritual effulgence is radiating only at a very low degree. But in a Buddha, the enlightened one, it is radiating with full effulgence. The reason is, Buddha had a pure mind, which called internal organs, antakarana, mind and intellect. An amoeba is a highly unevolved, primitive creature. Similarly, in human beings also. In direct proportion to the level of the degree of purity of our mind and intellect, this Atman reflects in our system. That is the argument put forward by Advaitins. So that point should be understood. So the central theme of this verse is this: there is no difference at all with regard to the space. Similarly, there is absolutely no difference at all with regard to different individual souls. This is the idea which Gaudapada tries to drive home. Rupa karya samakhyascha vidyante tatra tatra vai akasasya na bhedosti tadvad jiveshu nirnayaka. So rupa means form, karya means function or utility, and name. They differ everywhere, here and there. But space or akasha is not divided into parts. They remain the same. The same is true of all the individual jivas in this world as well. This is the idea behind. Now we come to the 7th verse. Another point again, you need little patience when you read Gaudapada, because Gaudapada is so nagging, absolutely uncompromising. You can think of an old bearded philosopher sitting next to you with great tenacity going on driving home the same central idea unless you accept him. So his verses are extremely simple. From a linguistic point of view, Gaudapada's verses are very, very simple. His poetry is very simple, even simpler than even Bhagavad Gita. But the philosophy is extremely profound. That's the idea behind. Sno akasasya ghadakasho vikara avayavo yatha naivatmana sada jivo vikara avayavo tatha. Here also, yatha ghadakashaka akashasya vikara avayavo is a dual number, na. Tatha jivaha sada atmanaha vikara avayavo na. Now somebody may ask the question, and it is very simple. You ask anybody. The space confined within the pot is a part of the universal space. That's what somebody will. That's what many arguments, many philosophers will tell you. The space confined to a pot. Let us think of say 100 vessels made of clay sitting in front of you, all of them empty. And there is space confined to each of them. Small glasses, big pots, vessels, and so on. Now, what is the relationship between the space confined within a pot and the space outside, the unlimited space outside? A commonplace answer will be, well, the space within the pot is a part of the space outside. Now, Gaudapada says it is not a part. Why? Because there is no division. Part, if you say it's part, it means there is a part and whole relationship, which implies some kind of division. But there is no difference at all. The part in no way limits the universal presence of the universal space outside. Vikara means evolute or something which comes out of that. So, or part. So there is no part and whole relationship, or the relationship between an evolute or something of which it is an evolute, between the space limited or confined within a space, within a pot, and the space outside. There is absolutely no difference. The idea is this, according to Ramanujite philosophy, according to qualified non-dualistic philosophy, another school of Vedanta, the relationship between God and human beings is the relationship between whole and part. God is whole, and all the jivas, all the individual beings in the world constitute a part of the whole. The universe, with all the different beings, with all the beings living in the universe, and also the different individual souls, all constitute parts of the whole. The whole is God, and the part consists of the world with all the beings in the world, and also different individual beings. Sometimes called, now here there is the implication of unity, and there is also the implication of difference. The difference is not absolute as in Madhva philosophy or in dualistic school of philosophy, because there is relationship between part and whole. But there is no perfect unity. There is no perfect unity, because One is a part, the other is a whole. That's why his system is called Visishta Advaita, or qualified non-dualistic system. Chit Achit Visishta. Chit means the conscious beings. All the individual jivas, individual souls, individual selves they constitute chit. They have got consciousness. The entire created world, universe, constitute achit, means the unconscious, the achetana, things which do not have consciousness. So Ramanuja expounded a philosophy in which he argued, he tried to establish that the relationship between the world and also the different beings in this world and God is one of part and whole relationship. Amsha, Amsi, Sambandha it is called. Part and whole relationship. Now Gaudapada is not willing to accept these views. Of course you have to remember Ramanuja came almost say 600 years or 500, nearly 600 years after Gaudapada, maybe 700 years after Gaudapada. But similar views were prevalent among some philosophers during his time also. Ramanuja, of course, he established a Visistadvaita philosophy, mostly taking ideas from his predecessors. So we will come to that subject again in the next class. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.